I bought my property for one reason: to stay as far away from an HOA as possible. Before I even signed the paperwork, I triple-checked every legal document to make sure my land was completely outside their jurisdiction. For months, everything was perfect. No nosy neighbors, no pointless rules, just peace and quiet. Then the letters started arriving. The first one was almost laughable. Welcome to the community. As a resident, you are required to follow HOA guidelines. Please see the attached list of expectations. I skimmed the paper. Lawn must be maintained at all times. No outbuildings without HOA approval. Exterior paint colors must be pre-approved. I snorted. None of this applied to me. I ignored the letter. Then another one came. Your property has been found in violation of HOA landscaping rules. You are required to remove all non-compliant structures within 14 days or face fines. Fines? From my own property? I called the HOA office, expecting to clear this up in 5 minutes. Instead, the conversation went like this. Me, I don't live in your HOA. HOA rep. Sir, all properties in this community fall under our jurisdiction. Me, no, they don't. I checked before I bought. My property is legally separate. HOA rep, that's incorrect. You'll need to comply. I laughed and hung up. Then they showed up at my house. I was in my garage when I heard voices outside. I walked out to find 3 HOA board members standing in my yard, taking photos. I stormed over. What the hell are you doing? A man in a cheap suit looked up from his clipboard. We're conducting an inspection. You're trespassing. Get off my land. He gave me a smug smile. Sir, this property is subject to HOA regulations. I crossed my arms. Show me the legal documents that prove that. He hesitated. Then he pulled out a printout of HOA rules. I burst out laughing. That's not a deed. That's a rule sheet. Get off my property. The man's smile vanished. This isn't optional, he snapped. That's when I went to my garage and grabbed my shotgun. Now, let me be clear. I never pointed it at them. I simply carried it in my arms, barrel pointed at the ground. Their reaction was instant. The woman in the group gasped. The man in the suit took a step back. You're trespassing, I said. You've been asked to leave. This is your last warning. They didn't argue. They just turned and left. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A week passed, and I thought that was the end of it. The HOA had been humiliated after I confronted them, and I figured they'd lick their wounds and leave me alone. I was wrong. One morning, I checked my mail and found an official-looking envelope with a law firm's letterhead. I opened it, expecting another fake fine or empty threat. Instead, what I saw made my blood boil. The HOA was suing me. Their claim? I had threatened HOA officials with a deadly weapon. I had obstructed a lawful community inspection. I had engaged in conduct unbecoming of a neighborhood resident. They were demanding $10,000 in damages, a court order forcing me to comply with HOA rules, a restraining order preventing me from harassing the board. I stared at the papers in disbelief. These idiots had trespassed on my land, refused to leave, and now they were trying to make me the villain? That's when I knew I was going to destroy them. I immediately called my lawyer. When he read through the lawsuit, he laughed. This is absolute nonsense, he said. They don't have a case. In fact, we should countersue. I grinned. Oh, I was already planning on it. Within 48 hours, my lawyer had filed a countersuit against the HOA listing harassment, trespassing, fraudulent fines, defamation, attempted extortion. The best part? I had security footage of the entire incident, crystal clear video and audio showing the HOA officials trespassing onto my land, me politely asking them to leave, them refusing and trying to inspect my property, me returning with my shotgun in a completely non-threatening manner, their instant retreat the moment they realized they screwed up. Once the HOA board received notice of my countersuit, they immediately tried to backtrack. Their lawyer sent a settlement offer, saying they would drop their lawsuit if I agreed to forget my countersuit. I told my lawyer to send back one sentence. See you in court. On the day of the trial, I walked into the courtroom calm and confident. The HOA, they looked like they were walking to their own execution. Their lawyer went first. He dramatically described how I had brandished a firearm and endangered community officials. He painted me as a reckless, gun-wielding lunatic. Then, my lawyer stood up and simply pressed play. The entire courtroom watched as the security footage showed. The HOA illegally stepping onto my land, me politely telling them to leave, them refusing and acting like they owned the place, me walking away calmly, me returning with my shotgun, held safely, barrel pointed at the ground. The HOA officials immediately realizing they screwed up and running away like cowards. The courtroom was dead silent when the video ended. The judge turned to the HOA's lawyer. Would you like to explain why your clients were illegally inspecting a property they do not own? The HOA's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The judge sighed and turned to my lawyer. You have a countersuit for damages? My lawyer nodded. The judge looked directly at the HOA board members. Unless you have something more substantial than this nonsense, I see no reason not to rule in the defendant's favor. 15 minutes later, the case was officially dismissed. But that wasn't the end. Now it was their turn to suffer. The judge granted my countersuit in full. The HOA was ordered to pay me $25,000 in damages, including all my legal fees. The HOA president, the smug man in the cheap suit, was personally fined for trespassing. And the best part, the judge issued a restraining order, not against me, but against the HOA board. They were legally barred from ever setting foot on my property again. I walked out of the courthouse grinning as the HOA board shuffled away, defeated and humiliated. They never bothered me again. No more letters. No more fake fines. Nothing. My land, still private. Still HOA free. Still protected by my favorite shotgun. I walked out of the courthouse that day thinking it was all over. The HOA had been humiliated, legally restrained from my property, and forced to pay me $25,000 in damages. Their ridiculous lawsuit had been laughed out of court, and the smug HOA president had even been personally fined for trespassing. I thought they had finally learned their lesson. I was wrong. It started with little things. First, I noticed a few of my security cameras had been tampered with. Nothing was broken, but 2 of them had been subtly shifted, just enough to mess with the angles. Then came the vandalism. One morning, I stepped outside to find my fence covered in spray paint. Big, angry red letters reading, Community Menace, Get Out. This is HOA property. I checked my security footage, but whoever did it had avoided the cameras. At first, I thought about calling the police, but I knew that was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to fight on their terms, to escalate things publicly so they could paint me as some kind of aggressive outsider threatening their precious community. No! I had a better plan. Instead of reacting, I simply cleaned up the fence, replaced the cameras, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. A week later, I received another legal notice. The HOA was at it again. This time, they were claiming I was a disruptive force in the community and that I was negatively impacting property values. They were demanding that I sell my home and move out, or else face further legal action. I sat down, read the letter twice, and then did the only logical thing. I laughed. This was beyond absurd. They had already lost in court. They had been legally ordered to stay off my property. And now they were trying to sue me again, not for breaking any rules, but simply for existing. They were getting desperate. I called my lawyer. He sighed when I told him the situation. Are these people insane? Apparently, I said. So, what's our move? He chuckled. We bury them. And that's exactly what we did. The second court battle. destroying the HOA for good. If the HOA wanted a war, I was going to give them one. This time, I didn't just fight back, I went on the offensive. Within 48 hours, my lawyer had filed another countersuit, this time for harassment, continued legal threats despite a previous court ruling, defamation, their claims that I was negatively impacting property values, vandalism, my fence and security cameras, attempted extortion, trying to force me to sell my home. The lawsuit demanded $100,000 in damages. The HOA had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that because they were a governing body, they had some kind of special legal immunity. They were wrong, since they were operating outside their authority and attempting to enforce rules on a property they did not own. They were fully liable as individuals. That meant that every single board member who had signed off on this nonsense was now personally named in the lawsuit. They weren't just fighting me as an HOA anymore. They were fighting for their own personal bank accounts. When the board members received notice of the lawsuit, they panicked. I started getting calls from their lawyers, begging to settle. I ignored them. I wanted this to go to trial. And when the trial date came, I walked into that courtroom ready for blood. The final showdown. The courtroom was packed. Apparently, the HOA had angered more people than just me, and plenty of homeowners from the neighborhood had shown up to watch them crash and burn. Their lawyer went first. His defense was pathetic. He tried to argue that the HOA was simply trying to maintain community standard and that I had been uncooperative. Then my lawyer stood up. He ripped them apart. First, he played the security footage showing the HOA trespassing onto my land, me politely asking them to leave, them refusing and taking photos like they had authority, me walking away calmly and returning with my shotgun, held safely, their immediate retreat. Then he pulled out the HOA's own financial records. Through a public records request, we had obtained evidence that the HOA had been using community funds to pay for their personal legal battles against me. That meant that every single homeowner in Everwood Lakes had been unknowingly funding their war against me. The room erupted into murmurs. Homeowners were whispering angrily to each other. I could hear people muttering, "Wait, they used our HOA fees for this." The judge had heard enough. He turned to the HOA's lawyer. "I want you to explain to me, right now, why your clients attempted to enforce rules on a property that is not legally part of their HOA." The lawyer stammered, but he had no answer. Then the judge dropped the hammer. "This is nothing short of harassment. Not only is the defendant fully within his rights, but this HOA board has repeatedly violated the law in an attempt to bully him into compliance." The final judgment? The HOA was ordered to pay me $75,000 in damages. Each board member was personally fined for their role in the fraud. The HOA was prohibited from ever attempting to enforce rules on properties outside their jurisdiction again. And the final, most glorious moment? The entire HOA board was removed from power. Permanently. The fallout. The HOA dies. After the ruling, the Everwood Lakes HOA completely fell apart. Homeowners, furious over the way their funds had been wasted, voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. Within 6 months, Everwood Lakes was no longer an HOA neighborhood. The former board members, they had been publicly disgraced. Some of them had to sell their homes just to pay their legal fees. And me? I walked away with $75,000 in cash, a legally protected property, and the satisfaction of knowing I had completely destroyed their little kingdom. The final cherry on top? Before the HOA disbanded, they had one last piece of official business, removing my property from their maps. They had to legally declare in writing that my home was not, and never had been, part of the HOA. I framed that document and hung it in my garage, right next to my favorite shotgun. Never let an HOA push you around. They think they have power until they meet the wrong person.